Hello and welcome to Diminishing Returns, the podcast where we take a look at film franchises and then pitch our own ideas for sequels. This week, in anticipation of the new Mummy film, we've gone back to take a look at the history of the Mummy, starting in the 30s, but concentrating mainly on the incarnation that we're most familiar with, the Brendan Fraser vehicle of the late 90s and early 2000s. As always, if you'd like to get involved with the conversation, then do come and join us at facebook.com/Diminishing Returns podcast. This episode contains spoilers for The Mummy, 1932, Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein, Abbott and Costello meet the Mummy, The Mummy, 1959, Bram Stoker's Dracula, The Mummy, 1999, The Mummy Returns, The Scorpion King, The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. Enjoy. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Diminishing Returns. I'm Alan and with me as always is Saul.
Ooh, spooky Saul. Talking about mummies.
And Calvin.
Hello there, this is Calvin doing his Boris Karloff impression.
Are you having a stroke? Can you smell toast, Calvin?
No, but I taste copper and my left arm feels numb. Oh no, wait, that's heart attacks. Sorry, that's heart attacks.
That's more immediate.
Okay, and as you can tell from that very weak impression of Boris Karloff, this week we're looking at The Mummy, and we're going to kind of go through the whole history of The Mummy, or as much as we can. So we're going to start with the original The Mummy film. It was Universal Horror in 1932, with Boris Karloff as the Mummy.
Yes, correct.
It was part of the Universal Monsters franchise, Dracula and Frankenstein, all that sort of thing.
To what extent was the Universal Monsters franchise built from the ground up? Was it just that they happened to be making a Mummy movie and a Dracula movie and a Frankenstein movie, and then they were like, oh, these are kind of similar?
No. It was just like later on down the line when they started running out of ideas, and it basically it's like the Alien versus Predator thing. We talked about that a while ago. It's basically, oh shit, these series are kind of running dry. We've made about like 4 Frankenstein films now, so okay, we'll just take that asset and put it with that asset, and then do a crossover.
That's what I assumed.
Certainly at this stage, Universal was sort of mostly known for making these kind of horror films. Like they were not considered to be a very classy studio. Like Warner Brothers, you'd go to Warner Brothers if you wanted some like gangster sort of gritty drama, or you'd go to like MGM for some lavish, like Wizard of Oz a few years later, and that sort of thing. Universal was a bit grittier and a bit more
cheap.
Well, yeah, horror focused.
Schlock.
The interesting thing about The Mummy is that around this time, Mummy came out in 1932, and before this there'd been Frankenstein, there'd been Dracula, there'd been Murders in the Rue Morgue, all based on books. They all have a primary source material. The Mummy, other than being based on sort of like rumours about explorers being cursed because they opened up Tutankhamun's tomb, as far as I'm aware, is not based on a book or any previous source material.
It's based on Dracula.
I wondered how long it'd be until we got there.
It's just it's so thinly veiled, isn't it? It is just a complete and utter Dracula knockoff.
The Bela Lugosi one.
Yeah.
But then putting that into a framework of what was very big at the time, Egyptology was a huge thing. Tutankhamun had been discovered 10 years earlier.
People used to have their mummy parties, didn't they? Where they'd get a mummy and they'd just take it apart and have a look at what was in all the bandages. And
was that like an actual mummy, or like one they'd made, like full of sweets? Like
that's an actual thing they did. The mummies were 10 a penny in the old days, and They had mummy unwrapping parties, and you get a load of friends together, and you'd unravel a mummy and just be like, oh, it's a corpse in there, interesting. Huh.
What were they expecting?
Yeah,
it's like a massive mummy pinata. They just smash it to pieces with bats.
It's fascinating. There's accounts from back in the day when Egyptology was at its height of just like mummified pets and things were being sold for manure they just, when they went and got these tombs unearthed, they'd load up the transport ships with all of the human mummies and the things made out of gold and the artifacts. But then to kind of wedge them securely in place and make sure that they didn't break in transit, they would just wedge like mummified cats, mummified not sparrows, the birds they had, mummified, crocodiles. They just wedged them in all the gaps to kind of keep them secure. But then that meant when they got to the docks in Britain, they were just left with loads of mummified pets that they viewed as being completely worthless for whatever reason, which is crazy to think about. But yeah, they sold them on to be ground up as paint or, like I say, be used as fertilizer. There's cartoon strips from the era where, that people are satirizing the idea of people having crops haunted by the ghosts of long dead Egyptian cats and things. Like, it's really weird that it was just so accepted at the time. Well, I guess it was a craze, really, wasn't it? It was like Pokemon cards or Pogs.
Yeah, so Universal obviously decided to take advantage of this. And they just, took the Dracula idea, put it into Egypt background, and boom, there you go.
I mean, we keep talking about similarities to Dracula. Should we explain a bit more about that?
Yeah.
Like, it's not a vampire, and he's not sucking the blood of women, but he's structurally and pace-wise, the film is very, very similar, including some of the same cast members in very similar roles.
It's the broad beats of the plot. I think most people, those of you who have never seen the 1932 The Mummy, I expect you have a similar concept of what it is that I had before I'd seen it, which is that it's basically a zombie movie. A load of people go into a tomb and a mummy walks around picking them off one by one. That is not...
Oh, that's what I wanted so bad.
That's not even close to what it is. It's...
I was totally expecting, a man covered in bandages going, like a Frankenstein.
It's people go into a tomb and they uncover this mummy, and then within like 5 minutes, he just looks like an ordinary human being again. He's kind of restored himself, and he's in love.
Well, no, it's because we jump forward 10 years. It's just like the mummy escaped. The mummy comes back to life and walks off, and then it goes 10 years later, and he turns up as like an Egyptian businessman.
Yeah, and he's made his way to civilization, much like Dracula.
So, I mean, I think my classic vision of the mummy and the bandages and all that is from Scooby-Doo. I think that's the classic mummy. So it was interesting to go back to where it started, and it wasn't that at all.
Yeah.
So when did it become that? Well,
the sequels that Universal made are much closer to that. So I don't know to what extent that played into people's perception of the whole thing. And I think there's a lot of mummy movies that aren't Universal's doing that are probably closer to that.
Well, I think that, the first 10 minutes of the first film that we're talking about, that's kind of almost... there. It is these people, and they've just opened up a tomb, and they're at the dig site, and then Boris Karloff's behind them, and one of them says an incantation, and he comes to life, and he goes over and grabs the map, and then leaves. And
you never really see him moving.
It's kind of there. No, you just see a bit of arm movement, and then you see just toilet roll rolls leaving as footsteps. It's kind of But are we all in agreement that that's the best bit of the film? Those first 10 minutes.
Well, yeah. As we alluded to just then, you and I, Calvin, certainly both went in with very different expectations to what we were given, and I don't know about you, but I was so disappointed when I actually came to watch this film, because this was when I was getting into Universal monsters, and I think I'd seen the Frankenstein films, certainly the first two. I'd seen the Wolfman. I'd seen all these old films, and I was falling in love with them, and I was so excited for this kind of classic, very kind of poetic in a sense, but just take on a mummy walking around attacking people. I thought that sounds like it's going to be brilliant. And then I watched it, and it was just Dracula, really. And I don't know, Dracula always seemed like one of the weaker Universal monster movies to me as well. I mean, it's okay, but it's very... You can tell it was one of the first they made before they kind of figured out exactly what their style was going to be. And I was just disappointed. I think it's a very dull film overall, to be honest. I'm not a big fan of it.
I must admit, I thought I was surprised by a film that's so short and yet has so little content and moves slowly. It's remarkable. Like how much nothing really happens, and it takes a long time to do it.
So we talk about what the content is. Basically, a mummy is brought to life, Imhotep, and then he meets this woman, played by Ziti Johann, who he thinks is the reincarnated self of the princess that he loved.
Where does that trope come from? Is that from Dracula? The woman being reincarnated?
No, in Dracula, he's just wanting more women for his bride collection, I think.
Because it's in Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, the woman that looks exactly like Dracula's.
Oh, maybe it does come from the novel then.
Because that's a real, like, whenever you unearth some ancient evil in a movie, there's always a woman who looks like their lover from before they were put into hypersleep or whatever, and then they never seem to understand that it's not the same person, even though those
and does have a remarkable influence on them as well.
Yeah.
They're real pussy whip, these mummies.
Anyway, he sees this woman and thinks, I'm going to do some spells and make her come back in this body.
Well, what exactly was the plan? Because from what I can tell, he has to kill her so that he can bring her back to life. Is that right?
Yes. He's going to kill her, mummify her, bring her back, and then marry her.
So that they can be mummies, like undead, together.
I think so, yeah. But then this Egyptian goddess sets Imhotep on fire, and then that's the end of the film. We talked about the content of it. It is an incredibly short film, and it's impossible. I can't even imagine how much quicker it would be if people just talked normally, because everyone talks incredibly slowly, and you've got just these really long silent sequences of Boris Karloff like hypnotizing Ziti Johann, and then they're just like stood like about 6 inches apart from each other, staring into each other's eyes, and then some other blokes will come in the room and be like, "Oh, you're right then. Hello. What's going on here then?" So none of us especially like The Mummy, but it was a big hit.
Which is quite damning to say that certainly myself and you, Calvin, are big fans of Universal horror, the old classic films. I don't know about you, Alan, but
then I'm not a fan of Dracula, so...
Yeah, I'm not really.
There's not enough camp in these ones, that's the thing. I like my Frankensteins and my Invisible Man and Werewolf of London, where there's a good bit of camp going on.
There's not enough camp or, like, genuine heart as well, I think.
Yeah.
Because I'd say The Wolfman, which is one of my favourites, isn't exactly that campy, other than maybe Bela Lugosi's role, but it's got a very sincere, emotional core to it, and The Mummy just feels very cold in that front. I know it's trying to tell this, like, grandiose romance story, but it just doesn't really...
After that film, which was successful, they produced several sequels, but they weren't exactly directly connected, but they were just had...
Yeah, I mean, it's debatable as to whether or not they really are sequels, to be honest. I consider them to be sequels, but only because they're other films set in the same Universal universe that was retroactively joined up.
But it kind of starts a fresh continuity from what I understand, doesn't it? The first one, The Mummy's Hand.
Well, they're certainly new. They're just new characters.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it's either a sequel where it's set in the same world and new characters unearth a new tomb with a new mummy, or they are just completely standalone. It's kind of up to you how you want to take it. It doesn't really make much difference either way.
So, are they any good?
I enjoy them more than the first Mummy on a personal level. So this is The Mummy's Hand, The Mummy's Tomb, The Mummy's Ghost, and The Mummy's Curse. They're all pretty much that sort of schlocky, a mummy walking around attacking people film that we kind of wanted from the first film, but they're not done to the same standard as the average Universal horror films, so they're not exactly great, but I enjoy them more than the first Mummy film, just about, But I do need to make a special mention of The Mummy's Curse, which was the last one. Now, this film features a female mummy, much like the upcoming reboot version.
Right.
But also, I just want to say, this film, it's not great, but it features one of the most hauntingly beautiful sequences I have ever seen in a horror film.
Oh, wow.
Or possibly a film altogether. There's this sequence where the mummy woman kind of... I think it's her coming to life. It might be her kind of losing a lot. I can't quite remember what's happening, but it's shot at like an odd frame rate, and it's just... If you're a big filmy person, then I would recommend watching The Mummy's Curse purely to see this one scene.
No, well, part of the reason why I haven't watched them is because they're just quite hard to find in this country. It's like you need to get them on you need to get them in this big collection thing, and it's not going to like them. And, anyway. Okay, well, maybe I'll check that one out.
And then they followed these up with, well, weirdly enough, the Universal Monsters films started crossing over with Abbott and Costello. In the early 50s, late 40s, in fact, wasn't it? Frankenstein. Yeah. So Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein is surprisingly fantastic. Like, it's a really great little film. Have you seen it?
No,
I've never watched them. I'm aware of them.
I've seen all of their Universal horror films. I think everyone knew the Universal Monsters thing was at the end of its life, and they got back loads of the classic, Lon Chaney Jr., Bela Lugosi back as Dracula. They got all these people back to reprise roles, and they just threw Frankenstein, the Wolfman, Dracula all into this film together, but they made it a comedy with Abbott and Costello being thrown in as well. And I know Abbott and Costello did do these sort of crossover Abbott and Costello Meet. But it's weird because this is a seemingly canon entry to the films. This is Lawrence Larry Talbot as the Wolfman, played by Lon Chaney Jr., carrying on his story, and he's just interacting with Abbott and Costello, and it's a comedy all of a sudden.
Is it like Abbott and Costello are two kind of working comedy guys, and they accidentally sort of get caught up with a mummy? Or do they have like persona, proper characters in the film?
They play characters called Chick and Wilbur, but I think at one point one of them calls the other one Costello or something. Like, they're not particularly resigned to their characters. They play, I think they work in a museum, and the museum gets like a load of spooky artifacts delivered or something like that, and they get locked in overnight with it's some silly thing like that. But it's a really great film. It's one of the best Universal horror films, and it's surprising in that it's a legitimate horror comedy. It's not just a comedy with monsters thrown in. And yeah, this led to them doing Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy, which is one of their most iconic films from what I can gather, because I first learned of Abbott and Costello really through references to them in
The Simpsons
cartoons. Yeah, The Simpsons and Futurama.
Everything you know about pop culture is through The Simpsons.
It's very true. And I do wonder if that is where the image that we think of this mummy, arms outstretched, going at the start of Scooby-Doo and everything. I do wonder if that comes from Abbott and Costello specifically. Because you think that would have been a film that kids were probably allowed to go and see. It probably was something that just kind of permeated further than the more traditional straight horror would have necessarily done, because that's going to play to a very particular demographic who want to go and watch these, trashy horror movies. So, but yeah, that really was the end of the Mummy franchise for... But
then there was the Hammer horror films. I've not seen the Hammer horror Mummy, but it came out in 1959, so I guess it sort of just shifted over the Atlantic and...
Yeah, so it's them doing it, but they've bought the rights from Universal, so it's not it's not a Universal film. No. It is much more a man in bandages walking around killing people than a romance, even though they kind of keep character names here and there.
Well, from what I read, I watched the first one that Hammer did, just The Mummy, but from what I read, it was more, it took story elements from the sequels of the Universal film rather than the original.
Yeah, it does. It's much closer to the Carrie Mummy films. Again, it's very cheesy and trashy horror, but it's just a bit more fun and enjoyable. And you've got Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee in there. I don't know, Alan, you probably hate it.
No, not particularly. I was kind of
fun.
expecting it to be a bit more kind of camp and fun, if anything. I was just got an idea of what Hammer is in my head. But this is when Hammer was still pretty legit. They kind of went a bit more ridiculous in later years. I found it, a lot more watchable than the Universal one. Yeah, much easier to watch.
It's not great, but it just is more, like you say, more watchable, more fun.
There's one thing in it that I think you will really like, Calvin. It made me think of you when I was watching it, and it's the way that they portray the working classes. So basically...
Is it like, oh, hello, governor? Oh, you dropped your toilet roll, governor. Oh, it's a mummy. Is it like that?
Pretty much, yeah. Except
yes.
They're all in this one little village where Peter Cushing lives, but they all have wildly different accents, like Irish or Scottish or like West Country. It's like whatever kind of stereotype accent the actor could do the best. And they're all drunk, and they're in a pub and they one of them's poaching, and then he sees this mummy like wandering through the forest, and he has to go into the pub and go, "Oh, you better give me a scotch, governor! Oh, I can't believe what I just saw!" And then,
amazing!
And then they're like, "Here, Davey, have you been on the scrumpy again? What are you on about?" And then,
Is there a point in any of these films where the mummy walks down the street and a homeless man like looks at it and then looks at the bottle of alcohol he's drinking and like throws it away?
It's perilously close to it.
But do you think it's better than the original, the Universal one?
Yeah, definitely. And you get the proper Christopher Lee as a mummy going, and he's being controlled by this Egyptian guy. But then they do have the classic, like, Peter Cushing's wife. There's just this sort of really incongruous scene where he goes, I say, you look awfully like this Egyptian princess. and then like 5 minutes later, the mummy turns up and sees her, and he's like, "Oh, princess," and then it like calms him down. So
I'm
it's the
stunned
same.
that has become such an integral part of the whole mummy lore that they all this princess woman that they all see. So.
And in the Hammer one, it's
weird.
It's crucial to the story because that's how they catch him, basically, or that's how they. Well, they end up just blowing his head off. But there's a couple of good bits in it. Like, there's an interesting scene where Peter Cushing, he realizes this Egyptian guy is kind of up to no good, and goes and visits him. And then the Egyptian guy, like, he realizes Peter Cushing is onto him as well. But they have this very kind of. It's a very classic British film standoff where they're kind of being very polite to each other and he's offering him tea and stuff like that. But they're feeling each other out and they kind of both know they've got this ulterior motive. And it's a really cool scene. I think you would really like this film, actually, Calvin.
Oh, well, based on your recommendation, I will, seek it out. £10 on Amazon.
God. So shall we move on to, our generation's mummy, basically, the Brendan Fraser vehicle. Shall we have a quick backstory about how this film got made?
Well, actually, I don't know that much about this one because the DVD special features were not terribly varied. There is a pretty in-depth hour-long documentary on how they made the CGI mummy.
It was very hit and miss. Like that mummy, but in some scenes it looked great.
I mean, for 1999, this was. I think the effects are really good generally.
Yeah, but I mean, even by today's standards, there were some scenes where that CGI mummy looked really good for a film from the 90s doing CGI. Well, it was jarring how good it looked at times, and then like other times it just looked like classic 90s CGI and shit. But
I wasn't. Did you watch on DVD or Blu-ray? I watched Blu-ray, so that's probably why it looked a bit shitter to me.
I watched it on VHS. It was great.
I think I watched an HD quality rip that I got off the internet, so it's as good as Blu-ray. The weirdest thing for me about this film is the fact that it's a period piece. It just seems like the logical thing to have done in the 90s would have been to make a modern, like, update it, set it in the 90s in modern day. Like, I think it's why the film worked that they set it in, or part of why they made it work was they made it a period piece and it turned it into this kind of swashbuckling Pirates of the Caribbean affair. But it does strike me very odd that they didn't go for a modern interpretation. It seems like that's what they should have done in the 90s, and then the upcoming reboot would be the one set in the old days to kind of give a fresh flavour.
I think it is. It's just like that time period, the 30s, was your Egyptian mummy period. It was like, that's where you've got to go.
No, I know. It's just why I'm bringing this up now is I think it was something that was considered in the development process. I think an original script was set in modern day and they ended up reworking it.
I mean, to be honest with you, it went through about 5 different scripts over 7 years or whatever it was. So it was just one of those ideas that, okay, we got the rights to do it and we could do it this way. No, that we don't like that one. Here's a script. The director's dropped out. Blah, blah, blah. Like, at one point, George A. Romero was attached.
Whoa.
Oh, really?
I did not know that.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I wish that had been made.
Oh, thank God that wasn't made.
And they didn't like his take on it because it was too dark.
Well, it would have been horror film.
The guy who made Hellraiser, he was attached to it at one point. Like, all sorts of stuff.
I wish that had been made.
Clive Barker?
Yeah, that's him, Clive Barker, yeah.
Whoa.
So it was one of those things, it was in, like, development hell for years and years. So eventually, one thing and another, they wanted to do it quite cheap. They just wanted to sort of do it quick and easy. And it just never came together. And eventually Stephen Sommers came on board and was not exactly unknown, but didn't have a huge reputation, but was a big fan of the idea and produced a script that they liked so much that they just completely backed it, whammed up the budget.
Oh, wow.
And then they tried to get, like, Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt and all these people of the day, and but ended up with Brendan Fraser, and I don't. From what I could
tell that he wasn't their first choice.
Well, he wouldn't be, would he? But I actually think for the tone of this film, he's perfect. And apparently they went for him off the back of George of the Jungle. Like, that was much bigger success than anyone expected. And it was like, okay, he does this kind of comedy shtick.
I mean, I don't know. I didn't think he was that great in it. I felt like he was a bit mispitching it just slightly wrong. And I think it's because the film isn't quite comedic enough to let him get away with what he's doing. It feels like it's taking it just a bit too seriously. He should have been cast as Star-Lord in, like, Guardians of the Galaxy if they made it in 1999. He doesn't quite seem like the right fit for this one.
I think he fits perfectly. I don't think he could get...
And actually, I think the balance of comedy and action is done pretty well, actually. I think
it's every time there's, like, a cool, badass moment for him where he's, like, trying to be Indiana Jones, it just feels a bit tragic and lame. I just kept thinking, wouldn't it be better if this was Brad Pitt or something? Because he's not playing up the goofiness enough to make it work for me, and I don't know if that's just because I know what happens to his career after the film. Maybe that's clouding my judgment. But
I actually think, watching Brendan Fraser in this, I think he could act. I think if he wanted to, he could. It's like you just see these glimpses of proper acting.
He was in Crash.
And I yeah, exactly. And I think, I don't know, he hasn't quite translated it into anything else, has he? And he's a bit older now.
That's it. He's kind of he's missed his chance to really legitimize what he was doing, but it's odd because I don't know, it just feels like he should be kind of up there with Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt nowadays and making these big blockbusters all the time. I don't know, it's just...
He's more of a Keanu Reeves, isn't he?
Yeah, right, Keanu Reeves, that's a fair comparison.
But, it was interesting you mentioned Indiana Jones then, because I think basically The Mummy is the missing link between Indiana Jones and Pirates of the Caribbean.
Absolutely.
And this kind of action adventure. The Mummy's more comedic than the other two are, certainly more than Indiana Jones. It's much more tongue-in-cheek. But what is missing is, well, for a start, it's basically just Indiana Jones. It's way too similar, the character. And then what it's missing is what we talked about in our Pirates of the Caribbean episode, is that iconic character. We said how Jack Sparrow lifted Pirates of the Caribbean up above, and also an excellent director in Gore Verbinski. Yeah. And that's what this film is missing.
You're right. Yeah. If you'd asked me a few weeks ago, I would have said, what about John Hannah? But I've realised...
Talk about bad acting.
Oh, what?
Well, rewatching it, I've realised that
he's my favourite.
affection for that character was based purely on the cartoon series that I watched as a kid, tying into the films, and he's actually pretty shit in this film, isn't he?
I love him. He's my favourite thing.
He can't do the accent. Why didn't they let him do it Scottish?
I think it's fine here. I think he gets a bit worse in the other ones, but...
What is John Hannah, by the way? Because he seems like...
He's Scottish. He's a man.
Oh, no, sorry, I don't mean what is he in terms of where's he from. I just mean, like, what is
He claims
John
to be
Hannah?
an actor.
Well, it's just... He always feels like... When he shows up and stuff, it always feels like we're meant to go, oh, that's John Hannah, like, British treasure, John Hannah, who has done all these great things. But then what's he done? He's like a little...
Mainly on
bit
TV.
part in The Mummy. He was in Sliding Doors, but that was dreadful.
He does a lot of TV stuff. I don't know him from anything else. I just know him as the funny guy from The Mummy.
He's not funny.
He is!
He's not. That's the thing. I remembered thinking he was great as a kid, but like I say, I think I'm just remembering his role in the cartoon where he was portrayed by Tom Kenny, and he was like the comic relief.
He is the comic relief.
I was going to say he is the comic relief, but...
And he's great at it.
I don't think he works that well.
Even Rachel Weisz isn't good in this, and she gets away with it more because the character's a bit better pitched, but she doesn't act well in it.
I think they're all playing it perfectly.
I've seen her act well in other things, so... Well, that's it. I think for the tone of the piece, it works, and they get away with it, but it's not good.
It is. It's perfectly
John Hannah
fitting.
should have been better. John Hannah...
I know who you will hate in this film, Calvin.
Omid Jalili.
Yep.
Yeah, and I do.
Why? apart from your obvious racism, why don't you like it?
No, it's not.
I'll tell you what it's like, Alan, because I'm sort of on board with this as well. It's like when Alexei Sale would pop up in The Young Ones. It's just like they've just got this comedian to come in and go, "Hey, what's going on?" Like shouting at everyone.
Like, he does that voice. He does that shouty.
Well,
Middle Eastern voice.
If this film had been made 10 years earlier, it would have been Alexei Sale. Omid Jalili's career is based on Alexei Sale not working anymore.
You know who else is fucking awful, actually, whilst we're on it? And I don't know what is going on.
Kevin J. O'Connor?
Is he the guy who plays Benny?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That character, I feel that character is pitched in the right place. And it's not a good performance, but I still prefer him to John Hannah.
It's right. Number one, that is bordering on racism, frankly. But not.
Why? What is he? What race is he supposed to be that is stereotyping?
Just generic,
white,
Middle Eastern, isn't he?
But he's white, so he could be from anywhere.
No, but I think he's meant to be Egyptian.
I'm not quite sure what he is.
No, I don't think so. Because they're in the Foreign Legion, so they could be from anywhere.
He's doing a Borat voice.
Yeah.
He's from Chicago, the actor. Like, at least all the other, slightly bordering on racist stereotypes were, actors of the right, ethnicity or from the right part of the world to kind of... But this guy is from Chicago. He's mates with the director, from what I can gather.
Yes.
And he's just there going, my wife, with a fez on and, bad teeth. And it feels like the Chinese chef in King Kong or something. It just feels really... really surprising that they did that in a film from the 90s. And the character's just annoying as well. Let's not overlook that. It's a really annoying shit character. He does my head in.
Yeah. It
felt way more like a family film than I remembered as well. It felt like George of the Jungle or Flubber or something like that.
Yeah. Well, I think the sequel more so than the first one, because the first one still has moments of quite horrific darkness. Like, there's the guy who has his eyes and tongue ripped out, and then he's wandering around, and for a while he's just and then the mummy goes back and takes the rest of his body later on, and that scene always really bothered me as a child. And there's just bits
there's
of
not enough of that in this film,
even how Omid Jalili's character dies, where the cockroach scarab thing goes into his brain, and he dies, and I mean it's handled quite flippantly, because literally he dies, and the next scene is can you believe what happened to him? Yeah, I don't know, And that's
well,
it.
he's a character you're not meant to give a shit about because he's the fat, shouty one. But,
well, this is an interesting thing that kind of came up in the film for me, which was they really have to do a lot of stretching to make these guys the heroes. Because essentially they're grave robbers, right? Just because they do it like, oh no, we're academics, it doesn't really make it any different. Plus, they're not. John Hannah is a thief and a kind of money grubbing all the time. Brendan Fraser's just an adventurer, essentially. Rachel Weisz's character, she's the academic one, so she's the one who's supposed to legitimize it. But then even then, she's not. She's like the librarian. We don't really get much of an idea of what her academic background is. And I thought it was a really good opportunity here, which they didn't take, which would be like, make it that she's really well educated and she knows everything about Egyptology, blah, blah, blah. But because she's a woman, nobody takes her seriously and she's got stuck being the librarian. So this opportunity comes along to prove it and she goes and takes it.
I thought they were doing that at the start because they set it up. There's that really awkward exposition at the start where the guy's like, why do I put up with you? Because I'm the only one who knows how to read and decode ancient Egyptian. No, because your parents were my best customers, and it's just...
Oh, I think that's fine. That's the kind of film this is. I think that's fine. It's not gonna...
But my point is that we have to try and think these guys are the heroes. And they have to go to a long way to make them look good by comparison, by putting the crass Americans in who are literally just treasure hunters. As if there's some difference there between them. You've got, what's his name? Is it Oded Fair who plays?
Yes.
Whatever the ancient bodyguard is, or whatever the hell they're doing.
Yeah.
And like even he's like, what are you doing? You're releasing these ancient things. We're here to stop you. We're going to kill you to stop you from doing it. And then they end up being friends because they kind of come together at the end to help. And it's just like at no point. I mean, this goes on for the other films as well. They're always triggering the problems. Like they're the reason all the bad things are happening.
Well,
but then we still paint them as the heroes.
You know what it reminded me of? I mean, it just basically turns into Evil Dead near the end, doesn't it? They go, or not near the end. They go into a tomb. They find a book of the dead. They read from it, accidentally unleash this ancient evil. Then they have to deal with a load of zombies.
Yeah.
But that's it. They don't accidentally stumble into this. They go looking for a tomb to rob it of its treasures for whatever reasons they have.
I think that's fine. I mean,
they unleash a curse.
Yeah, but you have characters who, characters have to make mistakes. If they didn't create their own problem that they need to then solve, like they're just passengers in a rolling narrative.
Yeah, I don't see a problem with characters fucking shit up and then having to deal with it.
I think it plays more into the more overarching idea, which doesn't come into play in the earlier films, but I think by 1999 it's something we should consider, of the moral ambiguity of going into someone else's country, taking it over, and then robbing their cultural history so that we can put it in our museums. And I don't think it addresses that fact.
Yeah, but this is a film where they've cast a guy from Chicago as a Middle Eastern man and just like made his teeth really fucked up and put fez on him and had him do a Borat voice. They're clearly not interested in the ethical nuances at play within the film. And whilst I do agree with you, Alan, I think there's bigger problems that the film should have addressed first before getting into the colonialism at play.
Okay, go on then. What are the bigger problems?
The fucking ethnic stereotyping and the fact that all of the Egyptian characters are like buffoon idiots who die and you're not meant to care about them.
Yeah. No, the good guy is Oded Fair, who's like the leader of the... I don't know, whatever they are supposed to be.
Magi,
the guys who watch over the
that got very Indiana Jones 3, didn't it? It's like the secret organisation. Yeah. So I think I've probably underplayed how much I really like this film. Like, this is like one of my like childhood favourite like things.
It strikes me as something you would like, especially given the time and how old you were when it came out. Yeah, it makes sense.
I remembered like watching it and thinking like, yeah, fine, whatever, when I was a kid, and it's gone down a little bit in my estimation rewatching it. I think it's like, for what it is, you could do a lot worse.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that was my thoughts, really, when I rewatched it. It was very much kind of like, yeah, it does what it sets out to do, and does it quite well. And I thought the effects were good, and for the time, particularly good, and they did the job. And not just the CGI as well. I think they really went all in with the set design and all that.
Oh, absolutely,
It looks really great.
One thing I'll say is I wish this was more of a horror film. Like, it has elements, particularly towards the end, when it gets into horror, and it just feels like a shame that it is just such an action movie.
I like it that way.
I mean, it would be better if at least the horror sequences that were there were actually scary, because there are moments that are clearly meant to be a bit like, ooh, this is going to be a bit of horror, but none of them are...
It creeped me out as an 11-year-old.
I got really bored, to be honest, once the mummy was like a normal person again. It's the same problem as the original 30s film. Like, as soon as the mummy's just a normal looking guy, I don't care. But I did like that he's scared of cats. Alan, do you want to comment about that?
Yeah, I think they should have done more with that.
I do.
They should have raised an army of cats or something.
Well, that's it. He brings a cat out like later on, and it works, and then they just never do anything with it again. Like, and you're right. Like, why not just get all the cats together in Egypt and like wear a suit of cats taped to his body? Now, there's the whole thing where the plagues of Egypt are like brought about again. Now, what's the plague of meteorites? Because that's not a thing.
Isn't that like fire and brimstone or something? I don't know.
That's not one of them. No, what should have happened is the firstborn child of every family should have been killed.
That would have gone down well.
But instead it's meteorites or something.
Well, this is what I thought. If anything, in the film, they're trying to do too much, and like the whole plagues thing got a little bit lost in the mix, because like you could do a lot with that.
The plagues idea comes in, and it's you think, oh, cool, that's a nice idea to chuck in, and then it is just like immediately. Other than it somehow turns all the people into like zombie slaves that because they've got boils and sores. Because there was a plague of boils and sores that makes no reference to brainwashing and mind control. Other than that kind of playing into the plot, it just feels largely like you say, like a bit of a waste, because that should have been a big part of the film. It should have been like...
You could do the entire film around that premise.
Yeah, exactly. Like the
plagues.
The big plague at the end is going to be some apocalyptic event, especially if it is like meteorites or whatever. But yeah, can you guys guess what my favourite part of the film is?
I don't know if I can. When he's hanging?
No.
Well, I don't know.
All the zombie mummies at the end.
Oh, of course. It is really cool when they all come marching in and then they like, yeah.
But you can tell this is a film made pre-zombie renaissance, pre-28 Days Later, Shaun of the Dead, Dawn of the Dead remake, Resident Evil. You can tell it predates all those because just how they're moving, all the zombies are like really like comically flailing around. You can just tell that like the extras don't quite know how to be moving. But I like that. I like that they just have a load of like zombie mummy subjects that pop out at the end.
So, just a couple of years later, they did The Mummy Returns, because the first one, from what I understand, was sort of a surprise success. It was like one of the biggest films of the year and everything, so I suppose it was inevitable that we'd get a sequel 2 years later.
Shall we deal with that fucking kid straight away? Shall we get that out of the way before we move on?
Oh, is the kid in the... I haven't seen the sequel since, like, 2002 or something. So is the kid from the cartoon series in it? Is that where they...
Yeah.
I don't know about the cartoon. But basically, it's made 2 years later, but it's set, 11 years later?
Yeah.
So they've got married, they've got this kid that's 10 years old.
Yeah, it's the kid from the cartoon. I quite enjoyed that cartoon.
Yeah, I enjoyed that cartoon. And I think this film was sort of... they obviously had a franchise mentality when they were going into this now, and it was like, okay, we can have this film to set up that prequel thing and the cartoon, so we need that kid-relatable entity in there.
It just pretty much sums up everything about bad child acting, and bad child characters. Like, he's the precocious child, he knows he's really intelligent, and he's not scared of the bad guys.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just It's just the epitome of shitty child characters and a shit actor.
You know, he got the job because he was like a massive fan of the thing, and in his audition he could just quote the first film like verbatim, and they hired him on that basis. He's not really done anything since, has he? Freddie both.
Can we all agree that The Mummy Returns is awful?
No, I love it. My favourite.
Do you really?
Yeah. No, this was my favourite as a kid, and I still love it now. I think it's...
Why?
It's much more fun than the first one, and it doesn't have as much of a mean streak to it, which appealed to me more as a 12-year-old.
This to me is the epitome of just everything wrong with like Hollywood sequels. It's what Hollywood sequels are criticised for. It's just badly thought through, overblown, throwing CGI all over the shop that looks fucking shit.
I mean, I can't defend
too
that.
Too much of a franchise mentality, like you say. It's so concerned with gearing up for these spin-offs and the cartoons and all sorts, but not in. I feel like they've kind of figured out how to do that nowadays in a less shit way. I thought this film was awful.
What I thought about the first film was that it was missing a personality, either as a director or like as a Johnny Depp kind of, Jack Sparrow thing. It was missing something that made it more than just a Hollywood product. This felt like a film by committee. You do this bit, then you do this scene, you have this character, you have this character. The sequel, Mummy Returns, is like that, but even more so. And it's like nobody cares about this film. It's just like, right, what boxes do we need to tick to make that happen?
Like, you're being the weird one now, Calvin, by liking this. Like, I was being the weird one before by not liking the first one, because it's generally regarded as I mean, it's critically not very well thought of, but it's regarded as a good bit of fun. People like it. This one is generally regarded as a load of crap, isn't it? That's not just me being
yeah. Well,
a negative Nancy.
I was actually really surprised, because I remember these films from childhood, like I say, and grew up with them, and I always... in my mind, they were always sort of considered to be fun, like positive reviewed, like good fun, fluff popcorn. But they're not really.
I remember the first one being thought of quite highly, but I don't know. I think it always felt like no one really cared about the second one to me.
There is something about the second one that I don't think I ever fully understood as a kid, and I think I got it on this second time.
Is it the plot?
Well, yes, actually.
I can't say I ever followed quite.
No,
what
because
the
I
plot
was
doing.
sort of paying. Maybe I just didn't pay attention to plots when I was a kid, and just sort of got carried along with.
That would explain why you like it.
Yeah, I was very confused about all of the reincarnation visions and that kind of stuff, because the whole first film is about Imhotep trying to resurrect Anax and Amun. And then here the actress is there at the start, but she's just a reincarnated version of that character from what I understand. And then Rachel Weisz is a reincarnated version of the pharaoh that Imhotep killed in the first film.
No, the pharaoh's wife or whatever.
No, it was his daughter.
Oh, right. Okay.
Was it?
I don't know.
I'm sure it was.
But yeah, it was confusing, wasn't it? It was never quite clear what was happening with all that and why it was happening.
Why it mattered.
And I think this film didn't quite hold my attention in the way that it perhaps needed to sell that to me. And so it was just like, what's going on now? I'll just get in the balloon and do something.
I can't believe you guys don't like John Hannah. I think he's really funny.
I remembered liking him as a kid. Like, I went into it expecting him to be my favourite thing in the film when I rewatched it, and I found him quite grating, but I remember liking him. But like I say, I don't know how much of that's down to the character in the cartoon.
This film felt a lot cheaper to me, like in terms of the sets. The CGI is worse, but also like the physical sets, it just didn't seem to have the same gravitas.
From what I remember, it felt maybe not cheaper, but rushed to me. It felt like they had deadlines to meet.
Well, it did only come out 2 years.
It just felt like they were struggling to hit the deadlines, so the CGI isn't quite finished, and the sets have all been hastily thrown together, and that was how it felt for me anyway.
But one other thing I noticed about it, which perhaps is of the time it was made, it felt very kind of video game-like.
Oh, yeah, it really does.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how much of that's to do with the CGI.
Yeah, maybe.
Or
But
just the hordes and hordes of enemies at the end as well. It's like just this spawning bad guys to be fought.
yeah, and particularly when they're like not quite human bad guys, which is like, that they do that so that it makes it a bit easier to murder people. In the games. But yeah, there was particularly that bit where they're on a London bus, which again just feels so contrived. Let's do a scene in London and put on a London bus.
That's
for
fine.
something.
And they make a joke about how absurd it is. It's like John Hannah and the boy have to go and get their transportation, and then they're like, what do you get the bloody bus for? And it's just like, yeah.
But then when they're being chased and the zombie warrior things are chasing them, that felt like a video game then, because it was like they were attacking one at a time and he was having to shoot them like out the back of the bus, and that really felt video game like to me.
The bit that feels most like a video game for me is when Vin Diesel shows up as a PlayStation sprite.
Yes.
Scorpion.
Isn't that something to behold now? It's like, I really did feel like I was playing a game. Just the rendering of it is so...
I don't know if you said Vin Diesel as a joke then, or if that was.
Yes, it's Dwayne. Diesel Johnson.
Was that? I didn't know if you were actually confused or you were making a joke at your own confusion between them.
I'm trying to do a running gag where they're the same person.
This is like This is like one of his first feature films, wasn't it? And he wasn't even Dwayne The Rock Johnson.
Wasn't
he
it?
was just The Rock at this point, I believe.
You know what? That I completely forgot. But yeah, this was very much his transition from the world of wide wrestling foundation or whatever it was.
And this film, he's basically not in it. It really isn't there.
Yeah.
He's in the little prologue, and he doesn't do much acting. He's just a muscle guy.
It's like he went into an office. They took a picture
of his face. Yeah, wrapped it around a balloon.
So what is... Like, even when it was happening, I didn't really understand. What's the deal with the Scorpion King? They made a spin-off vehicle for Dwayne Johnson as The Rock.
Yes.
But the thing is, in the Scorpion King, that film, the story has no relation to what is set up in The Mummy Returns.
So, do you know, was it like they just had an idea for a Dwayne Johnson movie called The Scorpion King, and there was a script, and then someone was like, oh, we could tie this in with... our mummy
maybe, or maybe they just thought, Dwayne The Rock Johnson, he's going to be a big star. He's got the chops for this. Let's give him a chance and tie it into this for the franchise so that we get a market for it straight away. I think it's just everybody knew Dwayne The Rock Johnson was going to be a huge star, and they were like, right, let's tie him down, let's do something with it.
I don't know if they necessarily did. I mean, when you look at like Hulk Hogan or like other wrestlers that tried to make the shift, I think they were probably hoping that they could tie him down to make about 12 of these in like 10 years.
Yeah, but you're talking, the difference between Hulk Hogan and Dwayne The Rock Johnson is just plain, isn't it? It's like the guy's a comedic genius.
Yeah, but would you... Was that apparent from his days in the wrestling ring?
Yes.
And do you think
you can't play wrestling seriously? It doesn't work. You've got to be the comedy one.
Why make him such a sort of tangent in the film, like, instead of more integral to the plot, is kind of
what do you mean in The Mummy Returns?
Yeah, I mean, it felt like...
I think they just used him then because they wanted someone who looked massive and a bit Middle Eastern. but then they were like, okay, well, we can do more with this guy.
But were they? It felt, watching the film, like the Scorpion King was already in production at the time.
I don't think it was, because the two are so disconnected. Apart from they used the name The Scorpion King, there's no relation to them whatsoever.
But it only came out a year, a whole year, and that's it. And to make a film of this scale, I mean, you see nothing planning.
It is a weird thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and there isn't even that much background material on it, really. I don't know. I've never seen it.
Like, I could understand if the Scorpion King was this thing alluded to in the first film, and the fans were like, ooh, we really want to know about this Scorpion King thing. Are you going to do a spin-off about that? But it's just this random thing they drop into the second film that no one needed or was asked about. It just, the whole thing feels so strange to me. And yeah. Have you seen The Scorpion King, Alan? If any of us have watched it, it'll be you.
Yeah, I watched it.
And?
Is it set in the old days, like ancient times?
Yes, it is. It's proper swords and sandals. It's it's actually it's comedy action. Definitely, it's sort of same tone as the other films, but much more child friendly. Like it felt much more dumbed down and like for like a 9-year-old rather than a 14-year-old, if you know what I mean.
Interesting.
Distinctly different. Does the job. It was better than The Mummy Returns.
Oh,
in terms of enjoyment of watching it.
Yeah, I can believe
was
that.
The Rock still sort of getting into his, had he not quite found his acting method yet?
Oh no, he's right there.
Oh.
He's doing it all. Yeah, and completely sells it. And he has the perfect personality to sell what that is, which and it'd be difficult to play it straight. And he's got a little kind of cowardly, snivelly sidekick, and he has a big fight with Michael Clarke Duncan, and then they become friends and all. It sort of hits all the things you expect it to hit.
Did it do well? Because it really does feel like the franchise died with that film.
Well, it made more sequels. From what I understand, it was not well received critically, but money wise, it made a fair. So it made its money back and a little bit of profit.
Because I know they obviously came back and made a third Mummy movie in 2008, but that's a long gap to wait for this sort of film series. And it felt at the time very much like, oh, they're going back and doing another one, are they? It's like it felt like a comeback for the franchise.
I was so hyped.
Really?
Yeah, I was really excited for it.
Everyone I knew just thought, oh God, really? More of this? Like, time to let it go, isn't it?
I didn't know they'd done it until we started doing research for this episode. So, I was not hyped
because it was meant to be really shit from what I remember, and I didn't like the second one. So, assuming you both have watched it, what's it like?
I really don't like it.
I think it's better than The Mummy Returns, but it's also
God, no.
It's not in keeping with the franchise particularly.
Really
tones down the comedy elements. It takes it much more seriously. You've still got John Hannah there, who's kind of they've got a bit of shrieking comedy, but
he's minimised, isn't he? He's not really. They jump even further ahead in the future than the previous ones. So we're in 1946, 47 now, and obviously the young boy.
Yeah, so we jump another 10 years, even though it's only 6 or 7 years. This kid that they had that wasn't even born in 1999 is now 25 years old.
Yeah.
And then Brendan Fraser's 38 or whatever. It just doesn't make any sense.
Brendan Fraser's he must be the character must have to be about 50 at least, to make it all match up. And interestingly, Rachel Weisz didn't come back to play her role.
Yeah.
And I remember that being because I remember this was around the time I was reading Empire magazine and stuff, and I remember, and it was very open at the time that she wasn't coming back because she said the script is shit. I'm not doing this, and
that was a big part of why I wasn't interested as well. It just seemed like a very desperate thing.
But the character that they've got in the film, and obviously this is the script that Rachel Weisz read. Basically, she's, she was an Egyptologist. She was an academic. She made one of the greatest discoveries in the history of the science, and presumably is now, a very successful academic, writing books about Egypt. No, she writes shitty chick lit romantic novels for frustrated housewives.
Yes,
it doesn't fit the character at all. It's such a betrayal of what she's supposed to be.
Yeah,
that's very odd.
But yeah, and then rather than bring in another character, they just change the actor.
Yeah,
which for such a high profile character, you can't get away with that.
Yeah, it's really jarring, isn't it? Especially when you watch them sort of back to back like this. And I'm not going to say that Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz have the greatest chemistry known to the acting craft, but they did have something together, and they played off each other quite well. They looked good together. Yeah. This new woman, Maria Bello, I don't really know her from anything else, but really not the same.
One thing she isn't is someone who can do a natural English accent.
Oof, God, no.
Which is kind of rather crucial to the role.
I mean, the accents were slipping all over the place in this one. Even John Hannah, I picked up on a few points, which...
And the little kid who is at 10 years old has the crispest English accent you've ever heard.
Yes.
Is now full-blown American.
Yeah. This occurred to me when watching the film, and I think it's a wider discussion point, but this film is obviously... Brendan Fraser's getting a bit old, and we're going to need someone else to take over the franchise at some point. So they have his young, dashing son. Now, the point I wanted to talk about is, has this ever actually worked? When, like, I'm thinking like Indiana Jones and Shia LaBeouf, and like, has it ever worked where you have the heroes
passing of the torch?
No,
or do you mean specifically their child?
Father to son?
Specifically passing the torch from the established star of the previous films to a new guy who's going to take it on and make a success of it. I don't think that's ever worked. The only time that I can think of is Star Wars The Force Awakens. But that's different. That's not the exact same thing, because it's a saga, and I'm not sure if the films are entirely dependent on the stars of the previous one.
Well, Star Trek kind of, to an extent, with...
But they'd already established that as a new generation.
That's the thing,
in the
Picard
TV
was
series.
already established at that point. I'm trying to think, even in TV shows, when they like bring in a new cast of characters, it rarely works.
Anyway, Luke Ford is quite bad in the film, the actor who plays the character, and he's not really gone on to anything of note since, from what I can tell. So, yeah.
See, he doesn't do anything bad acting-wise. It's just completely bland character and characterization. And
Yeah, and I think part of that comes down to him. Like, I think
pointless.
Brendan Fraser, for all of his faults...
he's got personality.
Yeah, Brendan Fraser has personality, exactly, whereas this new guy doesn't. And then we're supposed to care about him romancing this this Chinese lady. And
Yeah, that was all shit. But I tell you what I did like. The father-son elements through Brendan Fraser and the other guy. Brendan Fraser's like, oh shit, I haven't been much of a father recently, and those little emotional moments, it worked. They just did it enough to give it a bit of emotional resonance, give the characters a bit of depth without making it like too over, actually relevant to the sort of plot line. I liked that bit, and I thought, Brendan Fraser actually doing a bit of acting and all that, it was good.
I suppose it's nice that they change it up a bit and go to Egypt, they go to China instead of Egypt, rather. But even when they get there, I remember you had a complaint about Pirates of the Caribbean where it all just starts to look the same. This, they go to China, but they're still in deserts, and it's like it just looks exactly the same. And they shot in China, but I was hoping for some like bamboo forests or something.
Yeah, I remember thinking that from the trailers and stuff when it came out, that it looked just so samey. But was it made on a lower budget? Because it always felt like it. Really, it always looked like such a cheap film from the promo material as well.
No, it was made for more money than the other ones, and I think this was supposed to be we took a longer break than we should have done, so here we are, we're going to kickstart it properly, and this is going to be a proper Universal franchise. And yeah, there was a fourth one, like all the actors were signed on for like 3 more films and whatever, and yeah, Maria Bello, the actress who took over from Rachel Weisz, was very confident about it, saying, oh, no, it's absolutely going to get made, and we're all gearing up to do it now, and then just never did, because they went down the reboot route instead.
Well, they tied in a Scorpion King straight-to-video sequel with the release of that one, didn't they? I had no idea this franchise had been going for as long as it has. I've only just seen before we started recording that they've made 4 Scorpion King sequels. But I do remember this one coming out around... It was the same year, wasn't it? So I think it was very much conscious.
Yeah, I think they were trying to cash in on that as well.
Yeah.
The fact that there was renewed interest.
I'm assuming none of us have seen any of these films, have we?
Nah, they look dreadful.
But yeah, I mean, the most recent one was 2015, so it just seems like they're still ploughing ahead with Scorpion King movies.
All completely panned. Like, they're all shit. Everyone said they're shit.
Well, they're all straight to video.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
trash,
the fourth one was straight to Netflix, is what it was.
Oof.
Oh, really?
So maybe that's what's facilitating it.
Straight to Netflix isn't the... Martin Scorsese's new films going straight to Netflix.
But my point is that even the straight-to-video route...
You mean it wasn't like Netflix commissioned it? They just made it.
I think they just
get it out on Netflix.
Yeah, it's probably because that's the new thing to do now, rather than try and crank out cheap DVDs. It's just put it on Netflix. That's the future. Man.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the DVD market isn't what it was.
Huh. Just to jump back to the Dragon Emperor. With all the supernatural stuff, and there's a terracotta army that comes to life and all blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
Even with all that, the Yetis were a bit too much for me.
Yes.
It crossed the line.
Yeah, I remember there being Yetis in it.
Yeah.
I guess because they're not a supernatural thing that's been brought to life with magic or something. They're just sort of living in the Himalayas and just...
All the other things in the franchise are like magic exists and a human being has done something with magic to imbue this object with power or transform themselves or something like that. Whereas the Yetis there, the idea is, oh, Yetis exist, just this magical fictional animal just exists. And I can see how that would be a bit...
And just another thing as well, in terms of what we were talking about the first film being not particularly ethnically friendly. This third film, I thought, it's set in China and there's a huge part of the supporting cast are Chinese. And they seem to do it legitimately, you know?
Yeah,
they all speak English, but, you know,
Was this part of the new trend to appeal to the Chinese
I was
market,
thinking that
or did it
when
kind
I
of
watched
predate that?
I think it predates it because it's not like... It is very much let's exploit Chinese history and mythology and make it fit what we want it to fit.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure it's quite to play to a Chinese market. But, you know, in terms of, we hiring the proper, legitimate supporting cast. And interestingly, in The Scorpion King... I remember thinking that it's got one of the most ethnically diverse casts I've ever seen in a Hollywood film. I don't know, just in terms of thinking about what the first one was, it felt a little bit more like at least the casting was a bit more open.
So, should we talk about the new Mummy, the upcoming one starring Tom Cruise?
Yeah, should we talk about this whole Monsters reboot universe?
The Dark Universe, I believe.
The Dark Universe,
yes.
Yeah, it's just been named, hasn't it?
Which is quite optimistic, considering none of the films have come out yet. Well,
to say Dracula Untold was... They made that film, and then at the last minute, they turned around and were like, shit, we should tie this into this thing that we're doing so we don't have to reboot Dracula in 2 years. So then they went and shot an end credit sequence.
Oh, really?
But from what I can gather, that isn't part of this universe, and they've just given up on it.
Yeah, because for a while it was supposed to be, wasn't it?
Yeah, but I think I don't think it did very well. I don't think people liked it very much, and it kind of makes sense. Like, yeah, why would you launch the franchise off this film that wasn't even made with the intent of being part of something bigger? So... Who knows? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. They'll probably make their mind up later on, depending on how well everything goes. But I think, essentially, this is the first film in this new franchise. And it does seem like they're really going for broke with setting up a cinematic universe. As you mentioned earlier, Calvin, Russell Crowe is playing Dr. Jekyll in it. But not Mr. Hyde, it would appear, although you never know, maybe the third act.
Well, I think, is he meant to be the Samuel Jackson sort of...
Yeah,
apparently
he's...
Whatever.
Yeah, he's assembling this team of characters. I've heard a theory that Tom Cruise will, like, absorb the powers of the Mummy at the end of the film so that he becomes the Mummy, so that he can kind of become the ambassador of the Mummy franchise who carries on into... subsequent films, which makes sense, but it makes more sense than this the Mummy herself being in the other film. But I don't know what they're going to do with it.
Doesn't Tom Cruise seem like an odd choice?
Yes.
Well, it does insofar as, like, if they are gearing up to a big Monsters Avengers, like, are they all going to be A-list actors like Tom Cruise, Russell Crowe? That's going to get difficult.
Oh, have you not heard about who they've cast as the Invisible Man and Frankenstein's monster?
No.
Johnny Depp is going to be the Invisible Man, and Javier Bardem is going to be Frankenstein's monster.
Right.
Because apparently they've got the next film out in this series is going to be Bride of Frankenstein in 2019.
Oh, is that official now?
Yeah, Bill Condon's directing it. And David Koepp's writing the screenplay, apparently.
Oh.
After that, they've got Creature from the Black Lagoon, then Invisible Man, and then a Van Helsing and Wolfman film. Quite ambitious to say that the first one isn't even out yet. It's like...
Yeah. It makes sense, though. I've got to say, like, when... After Marvel did this, and it became apparent that all studios were going to try and make their own cinematic universe, the next obvious one was DC. But after that, everyone was sort of like, is there going to be there's going to be a Transformers cinematic universe, there's going to be a James Bond cinematic universe, and it all seemed a bit desperate and like, come on, guys. But Universal Monsters makes sense. Because it was arguably the first ever cinematic universe. The difference being that it wasn't built from the ground up. It was very much, like we discussed earlier, it was an afterthought, wasn't it? It was just like, let's smash these guys together in a film. That's where the term Monster Mash comes from, you know?
Ah.
Sticking your monsters together. It makes a lot of sense. The only problem is, like, what tone do you pitch these at? Because they're horror films originally, and I want them to be horror, but in order to make this work, they're probably going to have to be action-adventure films like the 1990s Mummy. I'm hoping they strike a balance between the two. I'm hoping they go for legitimate horror with some action in there, but I can't see them doing it very well.
I think it's just going to be pure action, sort of.
And then if they are just doing Tom Cruise with the powers of the Mummy, that's not even...
What are the powers of the Mummy? I don't know.
Well, that's it. What is that? Like Tom Cruise, but he can turn into sand every now and then to go through locked doors or steal people's life force? I don't know.
Even that, and Alan touched on this earlier on, but even that Tom Cruise is the leading sort of man of this franchise at the moment. It's like, looking at the cast list, they're all like men in their 50s. It's like Tom Cruise, Russell Crowe, Johnny Depp, Javier Bardem. It's like, do they even want to try and be relevant to a younger sort of demographic?
By the time they get to the big crossover, they're going to be in their 60s.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so with that in mind, how would we have done it?
Okay, well, I don't have terribly well thought out pitches this week, but I do have two, because there are two ways that I would like to see this franchise continue. One would be...
Are they direct continuations of the Brendan Fraser?
Oh, no. Well, one of them might be, depending on who we cast as Mummy. But the first one would be a flat out. If I was given $100 million and said, "Make us a Mummy movie, Calvin," I would basically make Alien in a pyramid. That's
exactly my one. We've done the same thing.
Yeah,
isn't that Alien versus Predator?
Should we combine our talking through this then? We've basically done the same thing.
Okay,
because that's it. I've basically said the exact same thing. My pitch would be everything the original Mummy should have been: spooky horror inside a pyramid.
Yeah. Okay, then great. Does yours begin with a when is yours set? Because mine is still in the 1930s.
Mine is set in modern day, but that is only because the Brendan Fraser film was set in the past. I would have liked to make it set in the 20s or the 30s, but I figured it'd be better to give it a bit of distance from the Brendan Fraser films.
But then you can't write dialogue like, "What are you doing, old chap?"
You can. You just have one like British like archaeologist who's there with them and.
Okay, so taking I had about like 10 people in my team, and they go into the pyramid. One of them's after just the money, he's after the gold, he's just after fame and stuff, and the other ones are actually wanting to do proper archaeological work, and then they release a mummy from a sarcophagus, and I feel like we should be doing like a sentence each here, because we've probably got the same idea.
Well, mine is basically just, I mean, the start of this new film is basically the setup that I want. It's just like some sort of military outfit dispatched to Egypt to...
military?
Yeah, I think he's military in the new film, isn't he?
Oh, okay, then.
I don't know, I'm working with that. Like, because with it being set in the modern day, you can't really just have, this is a load of, like, explorers digging up a tomb to find the riches down there, because you don't really do that anymore. It's too much of a...
Yeah.
So the idea I was thinking is there's some sort of intelligence, says there's some kind of MacGuffin worth securing for Egypt in this tomb or something like that. So there's a military outfit sent into this unearthed tomb, underground pyramid, or just something like that. Load of archaeologist stuff happens when they get there. Working with the locals and what have you, but they discover this pyramid, and it's just straightforward horror, like you say. They unearth this ancient evil that's still like living in this tomb, and I was thinking, The Descent is kind of the touchstone I want to use as the kind of pitch you're going for, because that's a really claustrophobic, effective horror film. And that's kind of what I'd want, but I'd want it with a slow, shambolic zombie mummy following him around. Like, that is the important thing for me. That mummy has to be so terrifying as like possible.
Yeah.
And you know, just the classic stuff. They get split up in their attempts to escape. I don't want them to splitting up on purpose. It'd have to be some sort of like, you know, some of them climb over a big cavern and then it breaks and they can't get across. Something like that splits them up. But you split them up, they get picked off one by one. Maybe there's potentially more than one mummy in there. Big boss mummy and all these minion mummies. You can do all sorts.
We need some animal mummies. That's what these things have been missing.
I'll save that for the sequels when you get a bit more campy and silly with it. Because that's the thing. I think this really needs to be played seriously. Like legit. I think there's legitimate horror with the idea of a mummy that's just not been done, and certainly hasn't been done or even attempted really since the 60s. But even then, I don't think it's ever been done well. But I used to read hundreds of spooky stories for kids and so on when I was younger, and the mummy stories were generally really effectively scary things. So yeah, like, did you say Alien in a Pyramid? The Descent was just Alien Underground, so we've kind of gone for similar. I've just gone for a more modern example, I guess, because I really want it to make heavy use of modern techniques. And
do you want to know what my other idea was? This isn't fleshed out at all, but it was Tina Fey and Amy Poehler meet the mummy. And in modern day New York, Amy Poehler and Tina Fey are living together in an apartment, and they find this mummy because some like burglars break in and accidentally leave a mummy there instead of another house or something, and they have to look after it. And and then they get caught up in some crime, and they make friends with the mummy. They each learn a bit about each other.
You've missed a trick here. The thing we do is we make this really sincere, scary film. Then we go comedy, and we bring in Tina Fey and Amy Poehler to do Tina Fey and Amy Poehler meet Frankenstein.
Yeah,
and then meet the mummy, meet all of them. But I like that. You know who I could totally see doing so and so meet the mummy? Like, I could see it. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if it's announced.
Simon Pegg and Nick Frost.
No, but that'd be good. That'll work really well.
Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen.
No.
Oh, I would love that.
Seth Rogen and James Franco, don't they? They just seem like two people who would do that.
Yeah, they were my second choice.
But the reason I'm saying them is they seem like two people who might buy the rights to make that film.
It'd be Seth Rogen and Jonah Hill, and then James Franco would be the mummy.
It'd be Jay and Seth. Jay, what's his name from This Is the End, and Seth Rogen. It'd be those two.
He's the straight man. Jay's the straight man.
And James Franco would have an inexplicable cameo as like the
captain of the ship who dies.
The captain of the ship on an iPhone for 2 seconds.
All right,
Alan. What's your mummy sequel?
Alan,
my idea is called The Daddy, and it's about Brendan Fraser as a baby left on his doorstep, and he has to look after it like a dad.
Oh, no. Alan would have Brendan Fraser and Dwayne The Rock Johnson as best mates who have to look after a baby.
Oh, no. Alan would have Brendan Fraser as the dad, but Dwayne The Rock Johnson's head superimposed onto a little person's body. And it turns out that Dwayne The Rock Johnson is a criminal on the run from the law, like an old Looney Tunes cartoon, and he pretends to be the baby so that he gets adopted.
Oh, brilliant.
All right, well, I did think of The Daddy with Ray Winston, but it didn't get any further than that. Anyway, so I wanted to do a reboot of The Mummy, do it seriously, but I just thought, why not go to the obvious source, which is Tutankhamun and that story of how all that was uncovered. I just think I know that story has been told in film, but I've never really seen it in a high-profile thing or tying it into the mummy thing. With my idea, in the greatest tradition of Hollywood storytelling, I read a little brief bit about the real people and then created a story around them.
Okay.
Because we're far enough removed from them now. They're all dead. We can libel them as much as we want. So
and you can't libel the dead anyway.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. We can say what we want. So
open on Tutankhamun, just stomping on mice.
Well, that's it. I've kind of set up a parallel story of the team digging him up and then showing Tutankhamun as the boy king, back in that time. So we have to sort of set up both stories, and then obviously they come together. So it's set in 1922. They've been digging up the Valley of Kings for years. Howard Carter finally discovers Tutankhamun's tomb. He summons his patron, that's Lord Carnarvon. Okay, so character-wise, Howard Carter, he's a very sort of gentle, artistic type, He's drawn to the aesthetics of Egyptology. He's an expert on the languages, that sort of thing. Whereas Lord Carnarvon is much of a loud, blustery, like upper-class type. He just wants to blow up the tomb and get all the treasures out and all that sort of thing. But he's not the bad guy. Carnarvon's not the bad guy. He's not evil. He's just a bit of a boy. He's just like...
Yeah.
And he's not very nice to the natives because he's like the English I.O. and everything. Huh? He likes to stomp on mice, whatever. So then there's huge publicity surrounding the opening of the tomb. So journalists are vying to be the official reporter of the find. And so then we're going to set this other character who's a ruthless journalist called Henry Morton. He doesn't get the gig. He doesn't get the job to be the official reporter. So he's like, shit, what can I do to get in there? And this is going to be the main bad guy of the piece. So he goes round to speak to Carter to try and bribe him, whatever he needs to do to try and get on the gig. And he finds Carter making love with another man. And so he uses this to blackmail him, and he gets himself onto the excavation team. So there are three sort of main players. And then running parallel to that, you've got the story of Tutankhamun himself. Now, he was the product of severe inbreeding, so he had all sorts of weird ailments and physical problems. And he became pharaoh when he was 9 or 10 years old. And so he's going to be like managed and manipulated by this advisor he's called I. That's A-Y, I think it's just pronounced I. Like he was an advisor to his father.
Can we please have Sacha Baron Cohen as the advisor to I?
Yeah,
as the father. So whenever he walks in the room, he can go I.
Okay, so I is the main bad guy, and he's just using Tutankhamun to further his own power. But then on the other side, we've got this priest who's trying to take care of Tutankhamun and his soul. And generally, so ultimately, I manages to kill Tutankhamun. He makes it look like an accident. So his job is done. He takes the throne. He ascends to power himself. But the priest who oversees the burial of Tutankhamun, he mummifies him. Whatever they do, the priest puts like a special incantation or whatever on the tomb, so that the boy king can come back to life and wreak vengeance or something. So then, boom! Later on, Carter unveils the tomb. The mummy is awoken, the curse begins to strike. But I don't want like a literal mummy walking around. That's not my kind of thing. It's got to be much more ephemeral, kind of more spiritual. No. So, which I know you're not going to like that, but to be honest, I wouldn't want any supernatural elements whatsoever. But what you got to play the game. So,
yes, you've got to make it entertaining.
So then people in the expedition, they start dying. We can have these kind of mysterious deaths that could be an accident. Lord Carnarvon dies from an infected mosquito bite. It's just put down to bad luck or, the bad health or whatever. But then Carter, he discovers a mosquito bite in exactly the same place on Tutankhamun. And it's like, it's got to mean something. There's got to be some connection here. And then eventually enough coincidences come together that he managed to work out there is a curse. And then he starts studying these other ancient documents. He realizes that to lift the curse, because obviously he's at risk himself here, he has to find the mummy of I and raise him as well in order to create a final confrontation. So he does that. He finds it, he breaks open the tomb, and that means and reads this incantation, whatever it is you need to read. So that means the climax of the film is the two mummies finally in conflict. But because I don't want the mummies to come to life, it's going to be like their spirit, and they're going to possess
King Kong, and the other one possesses Godzilla.
Oh, brilliant.
No! Stop trying to turn my film into silly action. So yeah, the spirit of Tutankhamun takes possession of Carter. the spirit of I takes possession of Morton, who is the bad guy, the journalist bad guy. They have a fight. You can have a proper battle then, like something. Obviously, good triumphs. I is doomed to eternal hell. Tutankhamun is left to rest in peace. Morton himself, the journalist, is not actually killed.
Surely when they fight, even if they fight to the death, then you're just freeing that spirit to go and possess another body and try again, right?
No, because it's more magical than that.
Okay.
And so it's like lifting a curse or whatever. So, but then the journalist himself who was possessed, he's not actually killed himself. Somehow the spirit dies, but he, survives. He has to flee the country, and this leaves Carter to continue his work desecrating ancient tombs. So basically, I wanted to make the mummy character a bit more of a sympathetic character, like the victim in it somewhere.
Well, this new one, I've realised that we haven't mentioned the fact that it's a female mummy. I feel like we should quickly touch on that.
She doesn't look scary at all. They just got some attractive young woman to...
But do you know why that is?
No.
It's not a matter of diversity or anything. It's because they were making the film and then X-Men Apocalypse came out. Yeah, apparently that was exactly what they were making the mummy be like in the new film. Their pre-production work and all of that. It was just going to be that mummy, that Apocalypse guy. And they were like, shit, we need to do something completely different with this. So they just made her into a woman instead.
There you go. The new Mummy with Tom Cruise is out this week, and we're a bit dubious about it, but check back with facebook.com/Diminishing Returns podcast, because we will post a review up there when we've seen it, and you can let us know what you think as well. If you enjoy the show, then please rate and review us on iTunes. It does all help to promote us, and we also like to hear nice things about us. And make sure you tune in next week when we're having our big biannual catch-up where we discuss all the films that have come up in the last 6 months. So that's everything from Split to Alien Covenant via 50 Shades Darker. What a mix. Don't miss it. We'll see you next week.
How do you use an ancient Egyptian doorbell?
Tutankhamun.
Yes!
What?
Toot and come in.
But that's not what his name is. It's Tutankhamun.
No, Toot and come in. It sounds a bit like it.